to address family law issues. However, within the first decade of the program, it became apparent that while LAM could assist individuals, there was a significant gap in addressing systemic barriers to justice. The individual case-by-case method occasionally created a chance for real change, but the criminal justice system did not always lend itself to the broader questions. Furthermore, many Manitobans, and especially those directly impacted by these barriers, did not have the means to tackle these large issues on their own. While council may have been willing to take on the occasional matter, it was at best a haphazard system. Now, I think we're supposed to have a pop-up question here. There you go. So we'll give you a few seconds to read that over and throw in what you think. Excellent. From this identified gap in access to justice and the opportunity presented by the creation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, the Public Interest Law Centre was born. Our legislation was changed to allow group representation as well as individual. Since Arnie Peltz assumed the role of the first director of Pilk, the effect of this office has been huge. Laws have been changed, policies rewritten, and funding decisions altered. In many cases, some of the beneficiaries of the decisions may not have even been aware of the work done by Pilk on their behalf. We only have to look at the recent decisions by MPI to provide refunds to policyholders as an example of their work, even though many Manitobans had no idea that Pilk was involved. Their work is as necessary now as it was in 1982. While staff and private bar lawyers continue to advance LAM's mandate to serve eligible, low-income Manitobans in individual matters in criminal, family, child protection, and immigration law, Pilk, using a mixture of staff and private lawyers, bring attention to accessibility, consumer, human rights and equality, Indigenous, and environmental issues affecting broad swaths of the Manitoba population. You have already been provided with Pilk's impact report outlining the work this office has done in the past. We're now looking for assistance in determining how Pilk will continue its work over the coming years. The need to challenge governments and other organizations to do better, to be more inclusive, to recognize the important needs of each community and organizations like yours continues to grow. Your ideas and plans will assist Pilk and the senior management team of LAM to determine how better and how best to serve Manitobans. I thank you for your gift of time to this difficult task and for helping us to make Manitoba better for everyone. Merci, miigwech, and Advocacy.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I'll ask Bryce to pull up the next PowerPoint, which is the Pilk Advisory Council PowerPoint, please. And Chief Justice Scott, it's your turn. You'll have to unmute yourself first. Oh, you're still on mute.
Now, how's that?
Great,
okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Scott. I'm a member of the Pilk Advisory Council or Committee, as Peter just briefly referred to it. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about what we do and why. The Advisory Council was created in December 2018 and includes a number of community members, representatives of the president of the University and of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, of course, representatives from Legal Aid, the Law Society, the Law School, and a retired judge, namely me. The objectives of our advisory council are threefold. First of all, to provide advice to the executive director of PILC and to PILC generally on issues of public interest. Secondly, to provide advice to the executive director on the ongoing portfolio of PILC consistent with our mandate. And finally, to study and make representations to the management council on any matters related to the public interest and the law that come to our attention. Probably our most important function is to help PILC and provide them with advice with respect to case selection. That's probably our most important function, as I've said a minute ago, and the most difficult. So we have developed some case selection criteria. First and foremost, there must be sufficient resources within PILC to both financial and in terms of staff or outside lawyers to be able to pursue the proceedings. The matter must impact on a systemic issue with respect to the law and the facts of the case so that it's a suitable test case. And finally, of course, there must be a reasonable likelihood of success. So at this point, I think it's time for a pop-up question. If we could have that posted now. There it is. Have you or your organization ever accessed PILC resources? (22 to 16). I think that's about what we expected. Okay, next slide, please. This takes us to the intake process, and you see it there on your screen. There's actually 7 steps. It looks complicated. It is to some degree, but there's a good reason for it. As you can appreciate, the number of matters that come to our staff to look at, to make recommendations, to see whether or not it's a matter that we can pursue through the courts, greatly exceeds our resources, both in terms of personnel and in terms of financial resources. So we have to be thorough and careful about the matters that we choose to actually move forward. So what are the steps? You see them there on your screen. First of all is the intake. Community organizations, existing clients, other lawyers, and new clients will contact us often directly about their particular legal issue. So at that point in time, we do a preliminary screen, which may be by a student, a supervisor, or a more experienced lawyer, to ask ourselves whether a reference might be made to another lawyer or a law firm. Other firms help us from time to time. And whether it's worthy of further consideration and investigation at that point. This leads to an opinion and recommendation by PILC staff, and we're now at step 3. And at that point in time, the matter is considered at a PILC staff case selection meeting. And if there are questions flowing from that, from the staff meeting, from time to time, the PILC advisory committee will be involved at that step. And if it passes through all of those careful reviews and the view of staff and the PILC Advisory Committee, if we were consulted, it's definitely worthy of moving forward and taking legal steps in that regard. There will be a meeting between the Executive Director of Legal Aid, Peter, who you've just met, and our Executive Director, who you're about to meet, to determine whether or not it's a matter that should move forward. Because of course, ultimately, the financial resources are the responsibility of legal aid itself. And at that stage, it's up to the Executive Director of Legal Aid and his staff to determine whether or not the matter moves forward or not. There is a right of appeal, which is, I'm happy to say, infrequently relied upon. So that's it. In the past, PILC has brought cases forward to the advisory committee, and this is a final matter, on its own from time to time when there are difficult issues to determine, particularly in terms of the public interest in the particular matter. So thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking to you in this way, and I look forward to a further discussion in whatever breakout panel I happen to be assigned to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Could I have the next PowerPoint pulled up, please? It's the Public Interest Law Center by Byron Williams.
Bonjour, bonjour, good afternoon. My name is Byron Williams. I'm the director of PILC, which is a proud office of Legal Aid Manitoba. And I want to thank you very much for taking part in this engagement. And I can't tell you how much I look forward to your ideas as we move through the afternoon. If we can go to slide 2 about who we serve. Our mission is to work with our community partners to make systemic change, to address barriers to inclusion and sustainability created by unfair actions, policies, and laws. And our clients are typically public interest groups, individuals with protected characteristics, persons with low income, and nations. Some of our clients come to us with a pure legal question, but far more often, they come to us with a public policy problem and ask, do you have any bright ideas on how to help us? And when we feel that there are potential meritorious legal solutions that are consistent with our mandate under the Legal Aid Act, we assist our clients by offering high quality, nonpartisan, and evidence-based services. And when you hear us talk about our services, it's not just about going to court, although we do a lot of that. A successful public interest campaign tends to be a mix of pure legal tools combined with research, with public education, with media and social media efforts, as well as respectful but in-your-face engagement with government. Successful outcomes for our clients come from partnerships. We work together with experts, with elders, with academics, and with our pro bono private sector legal partners. Above all, we rely on the insights of our clients, their expertise, through their lived personal experience or organizational expertise. And we work primarily in the areas of human rights and constitutional law, environmental law, consumer rights, and laws related to Indigenous people. And if the U of W team can kindly bring up the pop-up question, how can PILC better support, we'll wait till it's here. How can PILC better support you and your community? And there's a number of choices here. 58% say all of the above. Number 2 is legal education, and it looks like number 3 is a tie between, number 2 is legal advocacy, and number 3 looks like a tie between legal education and legal navigation assistance. If we can go to slide 3 now, I want to highlight the fact that our clients have been able to achieve systemic and material change both locally and nationally. And that's with the assistance from PILC under our legal aid mandate. And starting in just the last year, in May of 2020, our Court of Appeal came out with one of the key Canadian decisions over the past decade about social benefits in the Charter. And it found that persons with disabilities who are in receipt of social assistance are no longer forced to apply early for CPP benefits. And that makes a very significant difference as they age and as they seek to combat perpetual poverty. Also in 2020 was the assisted reproduction case, where our Court of Queen's Bench said that the definition of parent under the Family Maintenance Act discriminated against LGBTQ2S parents. 2020, we think, was a good year for our summer. You'll see the sum for our clients. You'll see in the summer of 2020, a Manitoba human rights adjudicator found that Manitoba's delays, denials, and disruptions in services to a First Nations mother whose child had disabilities were discriminatory. And if you go back just a couple years in time to May of 2018, you'll recall that our Public Utilities Board said no to a proposed 7.9% rate shock level hydro rate increase proposal. It reduced it to 3.6%, saving Manitobans more than $60 million annually. If we can turn to slide 4, please. The point we wish to highlight on this page is that in partnership with community, we seek systemic change. And this slide tries to highlight the work our clients have done on issues relating to major environmental issues like Manitoba Hydro mega projects, improving access to the medical profession for internationally trained medical graduates, meaningful recommendations about how to address issues relating to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and moving people with intellectual disabilities out of large institutions and back to their community. Just in closing and go into the final slide, in addition to the systemic successes of our client, Pilk also has an advocacy unit which assists individuals who are financially eligible for legal aid. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Jennifer Unger.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Unger, and I'm an administrative law advocate with the Public Interest Law Center of Legal Aid Manitoba. So what is an administrative law advocate, actually? We are a group of 4 advocates. We consider ourselves as paralegals, and the work that we do is supervised by the lawyers at the Public Interest Law Center. Our unit provides coverage to Manitobans in the areas of government benefits, such as employment and income assistance, community living disability services. We assist with cases relating to residential tenancies matters, and also we provide refugee representation. Our unit has kind of 2 areas of coverage and services that we provide. Our first is what I would call our information and guidance service. So this is when no formal work is required on behalf of a client, but rather it is an area of assistance for providing information services only. An example of that would be for an individual who plans to represent themselves at a residential tenancies commission or branch hearing or a social services appeal board hearing. We also provide information and guidance to a number of informal callers. An example of that would be an EIA recipient who has received a financial gift from a family member, and they want to know what their rights are on keeping that money, and also whether or not they have to report that, that gift to the Department of Employment and Income Assistance. So we can provide just some tips or some guidance to any caller in relation to our areas of coverage. Our other area of service is what we would call formal representation and advocacy services. So this is for individuals who qualify financially for legal aid, and they also meet a test of merit for their matter requiring formal representation. We would commonly appear on behalf of individuals at the Social Services Appeal Board, the Residential Tenancies Branch, and the Residential Tenancies Appeal Commission. The type of advocacy services that would require formal representation are, as an example, someone who would be facing an eviction proceeding, and there is merit to defending that proceeding at a Residential Tenancies Branch or Commission. Or an individual, another example would be an individual who's on employment and income assistance, and they have been denied enrollment into the disability category. They could seek our assistance to represent them at a Social Services Appeal Board hearing. At this point, I'm going to ask for the pop-up question to come up. So our pop-up question is, do you or your clients require assistance with? And then it lists the different types of services that our unit provides. I'll give everyone a moment to fill it out. Okay, so a lot of all of the above, over 50% for the type of services that we can offer. Another program that I'd speak about briefly is the Community Living Disability Services Program. So this is a provincial assistance program offering services to adults with intellectual disabilities. If an individual has been denied enrollment into the CLDS program, they may be able to seek our unit services with representing them at an appeal hearing to the Social Services Appeal Board. Another area of coverage that we provide is our newest area of coverage in providing assistance on refugee representation. From our unit, a licensed advocate would be able to provide assistance with preparing a basis of claim form, representation at a refugee claim hearing, a pre-removal risk assessment, or a humanitarian and compassionate application. And finally, our work as an advocacy unit has provided Manitobans with assistance in preventing evictions. We've also been successful in winning financial compensation awards for tenants, and we have been successful in having employment and income assistance benefits granted or reinstated for Manitobans. And we've also been successful in seeking and obtaining enrollment services into the Community Living Disability Services Program. So I'd like to thank everyone for hearing from me, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon in this engagement seminar. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much to our 4 wonderful speakers today. We appreciate everyone sharing the great work that PILC has done and continues to do. So right now we're going to take about a 4 or 5 minute break, just to give everyone an opportunity to refill your coffee or stretch your legs. And we will resume around 1:40 p.m. So we run a tight ship, but we want to make sure that everyone has enough time in the breakout rooms. So we'll see you back here in about 4 minutes. Thanks, everyone. All right, everyone. It is 1:40 p.m. I wasn't lying when we said we run a tight ship here. So now we're going to get everyone to go into some breakout rooms for smaller discussions. Bryce, who is our lead tech facilitator today, is going to be putting everyone into 6 breakout rooms. We're going to have 6 rooms of approximately 7 to 9 folks per room, with 1 facilitator and 1 note taker in each room. These breakout rooms will last for approximately 45 minutes. So facilitators, just a reminder that we will ask everyone to be back in the main room at 2:30 p.m. sharp.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope you all had very fruitful discussions in your breakout rooms. We'd now like to hear from the facilitators of each of the breakout rooms to hear about some of the issues that were discussed by you. I'm going to call in alphabetical order, Byron first. You're on mute, Byron.
I was really hoping I'd go last, but let me see if I can find my notes.
You know what?
I've got it. I'm good. I'm okay.
And I also just want to note my alphabetical order sucks because Allison should have gone first, but Allison, you're next.
So first of all, my group was fantastic. I'm gonna, in our group on what are your community's biggest legal or policy barriers, there was a tremendous amount of insight about issues relating to persons with disabilities. I'm only going to flag 3 of those issues, being meeting eligibility criteria for persons with disability and funding to meet the needs. That very sensitive time on transition to adulthood for persons with disabilities, and also access for appropriate services for Indigenous adults, especially on reserve. We had an interesting discussion about issues about creating safe space for trans people at work, both for themselves, but also for knowledge for their co-workers. And that was to create more welcoming work environments. In terms of newcomers, so many barriers at just knowing
No, not at all. No. I just
how the legal system works and navigating the system. And that kind of point about biggest needs or public policy needs, understanding complex legislation came up a number of times. In terms of what access to justice barriers do you and your communities normally encounter, a really important point that came from a number of speakers were attitudinal barriers, whether about youth aging out of care or persons with disabilities, assuming they're incompetent. An enormous need was cited for empowerment, knowing when you can push for something. What are your rights? Money came up as a significant barrier, as did language. And finally, awareness that there is help. Again, there were more notes, but those are kind of the 5 common themes. In terms of how PILC can better serve you and your community, a very powerful need was about doing more of what we do now. Increasing access to our services, and that came up a number of times. Across groups, whether persons with disabilities, newcomers, energy justice, or otherwise, an active citizen toolkit about the power and tools of advocacy. And is there something we can do together on that? More awareness of what PILC itself does, and promoting that back to the community was a powerful theme. As well, one of the issues that came up is an emerging issue in terms of for-profit service providers. This one came up specifically in the disability community, but we also know it's coming up in terms of elderly persons as they age. So I'll turn it over to the proper alphabetical leader, Ms. Fensky.
Thank you, Byron. And just a reminder to the facilitators that you have about 3 or 4 minutes. Allison?
Thanks, Joelle. In terms of what the community's biggest legal needs was a big part of the discussion in our group focused around people living in poverty and how that really drives a lot of their needs in terms of access to resources that that people are continuing to experience discrimination, that there are mental health issues that get layered onto those experiences of poverty, and that access to services, eligibility to services and resources, and addressing restrictions on rights or discrimination, and recognizing that for a lot of folks coming from marginalized communities, whether that's because of the poverty itself or just recognizing that that many folks are overrepresented within that, in terms of people who are living with disabilities, folks who are Black, Indigenous, and experiencing discrimination and in other ways, that it all kind of goes together, and that those are kind of the biggest, being able to address those experiences and access to resources is a big legal need for folks. In terms of access to justice barriers, what we talked about is just the fact that for a lot of folks, not having their basic needs met is an access to justice barriers, because they're caught in a cycle of needing to address their basic needs and don't get to those larger systemic reforms, or that for a lot of folks that they are needing assistance in times of crisis. So much of this is crisis driven, and people are really worn down from having to always jump from crisis to crisis, and that prevents a real barrier for people being able to assert their rights. It also creates distrust, whether that's distrust in the legal system or even distrust in organizations that are there to serve them, whether that's PILC or another community organization. There's a lot of distrust in systems because people have been failed by them so many times. So doing the work we need to do to make sure that we're not creating an additional barrier in terms of community trust, and all of that leads to the basic legal barriers we understand as being access to legal information, representation, and public policy advocacy. We don't even often get to that point of experiencing that barrier because folks are experiencing barriers around their basic needs. When it comes to what PILC can do to serve people better, I was gently reminded by a few folks in our group that we're doing a really great job on what we've been doing, and that maybe the question is not so much what we can do better, but how do we continue to serve folks, and how can we continue to do the things we're already doing well, and what that looks like. Looking to the folks that have existing really invaluable relationships with PILC and expanding that network in terms of other organizations that we don't necessarily have as strong of a relationship or as a long-standing a relationship with, just growing the network of important community relationships in terms of what PILC does. The other piece that was acknowledged by one of our participants that I thought was really helpful and folks agreed with was just knowledge and information being an important piece of something that we could potentially be doing more around, so that that was aimed at people even recognizing legal issues, understanding something as a legal issue, and understanding that we might be there as a potential service or support for them.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. Chris, are you able to go next and share your screen?
I am. Hi, folks. Thanks to everyone in group 3. I think we had or what was for me, an interesting and productive discussion. I'll just share my screen here so you can see my notes. And we'll go through these together. Concerning our community's biggest legal and public policy needs, it was raised in our group that needs are broad, covering just about all areas of the law. And it was pointed out too that Indigenous people and nations face particular and broad legal challenges. Partly as a response to some of the identified legal and public policy needs, it was identified that PILC possesses experience and knowledge of systems and processes. And so some of the needs that were identified could potentially be remedied by support that PILC could offer in navigating these systems or in monitoring these systems and processes, for example, long-term monitoring of Manitoba Hydro. And additionally, as has been said once already, seniors' rights and the need for improved protections of human rights for seniors and elders was also raised. Regarding access to justice barriers, a significant one that was discussed in our group related to delay, both before courts and in administrative processes. And relatedly, it was raised that regulatory processes and the law in general is frequently not designed to reflect well the lives of the people it's intended to serve. And so that creates all sorts of barriers related to process, related to logistics, related to technological access to decision makers, and can all be summed up in the broader idea that the legal system and the law does not work the same for everyone. Interestingly and importantly, it was raised that Indigenous issues are frequently framed as being counter to rather than consistent to public interest, and that element of public consciousness creates an access to justice barrier in itself. The failure of legislation to keep up with societal changes without prompting was identified as a barrier, and a specific barrier that came into being recently in Manitoba that was raised relates to a legislative change removing the right of appeal to the Manitoba Court of Appeal in the Residential Tenancies Act. And lastly, what PILC can do to better serve our communities. A gap was identified relating to individuals facing individual or fact-specific issues, not knowing that their issues are actually systemic or that there are others who are similarly situated who might benefit from a broader, more systemic approach. There were also multiple needs for public education identified, both related to rights when engaging in the civil legal system and in the criminal legal system related to parole planning. And not so much something that PILC can change, but something that PILC could continue to do relates to the value that PILC provides to its clients and community by supporting network building. And that's both related to the informal supports that PILC personnel frequently provide to members of the community, and also through the connections that PILC's client organizations make either with lawyers or researchers or other similar and like-minded organizations. As has been said already, PILC has some work to do in increasing awareness of ourselves and our work. And it was suggested that PILC does good work, but that there are lots of unmet needs and that PILC's service should continue to grow, both with increased time and resources. And it was also mentioned that PILC's presence in the media is valuable, both for its clients' interests and for PILC as an organization, and that for both those purposes, those efforts should be continued and increased. Thanks all.
Thank you, Chris. I have Catherine next.
Can people see my screen?
Oui.
Okay, perfect. So I definitely don't only have 4 bullets, but I will try to keep it at 3 to 4 minutes. So in terms of what are your community's biggest legal or public policy needs?
Sorry, Catherine, we can't see the document anymore.
Okay, just a second.
There you go.
Perfect. Sorry about that. So what are your community's biggest legal or public policy needs? We heard a lot of specific issues, which I've noted down, but I won't go into detail. I'll try to keep it more at the systemic level. We heard a big priority would be building a fair justice system for everyone, but focusing especially on those that are family members that have a disability. We heard about a focus on a basic income, which would help to address many, but definitely not all, public policy and legal needs that were identified by our group. We heard about access to financial services, rule rates, regulations around financial services that are not currently regulated. Assistance with dealing with landlords, as well as access to benefits, including EIA, dealing with Canada Revenue Agency as well. We heard about assistance with refugee claims being a big need. Consumer protection was another need that was identified, as well as assistance with the child protection and youth justice system. Sometimes it's not clear whether there's access to advocacy assistance and if there could be more of that. For question number 2, what access to justice barriers do you and your community normally encounter? There were a few themes here. Definitely cost was identified as a barrier. We heard from a lot of folks that government forms and other forms that are not in plain language are a huge barrier. The forms are often built by the people who work there and are not necessarily built for the people who need to fill them out and use the forms. So that was a very big barrier for folks with disabilities, as well as folks who may be living in poverty or facing homelessness or other challenging situations. Transportation was identified as a barrier. Lack of understanding and awareness of legal rights, or even when you might be facing a legal issue, and lack of accessibility in the system. Access to phone was also another barrier. Accountability measures within the justice system, including the police in the courthouse, was noted as a barrier. And accessibility for clients to connect and get representation. So there was talk about Legal Aid being made more accessible to vulnerable groups of individuals. There were, of course, other items, but I'll keep it at that for that question. And I think question number 3 was really where there was most agreement in terms of what PILC could do to better serve you and your community. It was really heartwarming to hear people say, make PILC bigger. I think one person said we should be 4 times our size, and someone even said we should be 10 times our size. So that was pretty cool coming from someone who works at PILC. So make PILC bigger with a lot more money in terms of resources so that PILC can take on more cases and do more work in general. So there was talk about how the need definitely surpasses the work that we're actually able to do given our size. Another big item was providing more information about what PILC does and how the services can be accessed, and making this information accessible both in terms of physical accessibility and plain language, as well as specifying the differences between legal aid services, PILC services, and PILC advocacy unit services. We had a few people who had not heard about the PILC advocacy unit service. So Jennifer, you and your colleagues will be getting some calls. This point was interesting, flexibility so that PILC can take on issues as they arise, so that we're not always booked solid and then we can't respond to emergencies as they arise. And I know that's something we've talked about internally as well. Asking people on an annual basis, what are the priorities, and then sharing back with organizations and clients what PILC intends to be working on in the next year. So having that two-way street. And finally, expanding on our partnership with the private bar and pro bono lawyers so that we can increase our resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Everything has been so interesting. I'm going to call on Mats next.
Okay, am I sharing the right screen? I hope so, because I can't tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we had a really fantastic discussion in our group. Under the first question, the biggest legal and public policy needs that were expressed were access to environmental legal information and legal representation. So there was an express need specifically for information and representation on environmental issues. There was a strong expression that legal services in Manitoba are very much focused on the city, and there's a problem of perimeteritis that creeps in and that really negatively impacts rural Manitobans. Eligibility criteria, both in terms of their vagueness and the increasing restrictiveness with which they are being applied, was also identified as a public policy need to make change on that. So more information on eligibility criteria for programs like CLDS and EIA. And also legislative improvements to bolster protections for service users and applicants. And then generally, another public policy that need is knowledge of services available for youth specifically, and advocacy for systems navigation. And one specific point was plans for assisting youth to safely exit gang situations. And that was brought up just because of the many different complications involved in transitioning out of that situation, and also the deep importance of that moment. Under the second question for access to justice barriers that the community groups encounter, one that was consistently brought up was costs of hiring legal representation. This was particularly highlighted in the context of environmental law regarding the collection of evidence on environmental matters. And then also improving the community awareness of what legal issues actually are and what the law can do to help. Once again, distance was brought up. So for rural Manitobans, there's different services, different quality of services provided within Winnipeg and outside of Winnipeg. And then especially for rural Manitobans, but not just for rural Manitobans, all of the extra costs involved with engaging in the legal world, whether that's not just related to hiring counsel, but also transportation, childcare, the length of time that legal processes can drag on. All of these things are barriers. A lack of information, which has been touched on quite a bit already. And then literacy and language comprehension. And this was explained as an issue that lawyers need to be aware of how they're communicating issues to different community groups. And this also touches on representation, particularly of Indigenous lawyers in the field, and making sure that everyone who's accessing legal services sees themselves represented in those services and feels comfortable engaging in that world. Under the third header, we had what can Pilk do to serve you better? Legal education workshops for staff of different NGOs to help explain eligibility criteria, collaborations on research, and also developing preventative resources so that particularly youth can not get into risky situations. More Pilk staff, and then later it was mentioned more Jennifers in particular. In terms of what we could be doing to improve our engagement and support for First Nation, Inuit, and Métis laws, asking questions was highlighted as an important step, communication, and then also promoting wraparound services for true reconciliation in interpersonal conflicts. So after the fact, following victims through and supporting that process. And then the last thing was information on evidence gathering for expert evidence in environmental law matters.
Great, thank you, Max. And lastly, over to you, Tyler, for 2 to 3 minutes, please. You're still on mute, Tyler. So I'm sure you're saying wonderful things, but we can't hear you.
Hi, sorry. I just want to say I took shorthand notes, so I won't be sharing my screen. I apologize. I must have missed that instruction in the facilitator package. So I'll just go through what I wrote. So in terms of legal needs of each community, we heard that those people need assistance with accessing employment and income assistance benefits, and also assistance when those benefits are being removed. Also, we heard that young people don't understand the legal system. They don't understand how to access remedies or understand procedure. We also heard that there's a greater need for recognition of trans rights and support for queer family dynamics. And also just legal research for educational programming is a need that was expressed in our group discussion. With access to justice barriers, one thing that we heard was that lawyers don't understand their clients and they don't understand the community that their clients are from. And this is leading to barriers for accessing meaningful legal services. Again, understanding the legal system was expressed. Again, access to remedies, understanding what your rights are, both under human rights codes and the charter, was something that was expressed. Also, just a greater understanding of what discrimination is and what accessibility in the workplace means for access to justice barriers that were expressed. How PILC can better serve you and your community. One thing that was shared by everyone is that PILC is currently helping them, and we would just like to see more assistance. So that was something that was very pleasing for me as someone who works with PILC. We heard that there is a need for greater support in combating systemic discrimination in employment, schools, community housing, both in terms of accessing legal remedies and policy change. One thing that was expressed was it would be great to see a mentorship program where PILC lawyers and PILC students can work with young students that are interested in accessing the legal profession and just provide guidance on how to approach studying for law school, your applications for law school, providing a deeper understanding of what public interest law is for people that are interested in the legal profession. And we heard that more community engagement would be great, just so that there's a greater understanding of what's happening in the community by PILC and their staff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. So before we end off today, I'd like to take the opportunity to share PILC's gratitude for a few people. So thanks to Dr. Patricia Fitzpatrick and Patrick Faulkner, who were integral in their guidance to assist us in planning for the webinars. Thanks to the volunteer note takers and facilitators, to Bryce Brennan, who was managing the technical element of today's event, to the individuals who were assisting us with closed captions today, to my wonderful co-facilitator and planner extraordinaire, Paula Ethans. And most importantly, thank you all for coming today, for sharing your insights. We appreciate so much your time and value all of the experiences and insights you shared with us today to help us imagine how PILC can better serve you and the community at large. For those who feel comfortable in doing so, I will request that folks put their cameras on so I can take a couple pictures. For those of you who do not feel comfortable being in pictures, now would be the time to turn your camera off. I see some folks readjusting your hair, so I'll give you a couple moments. Byron, yeah, there you go. Okay, so I have 2 pages, so this may be a little bit awkward, but I'm gonna just take the first picture now. So 1, 2, 3. And second picture, 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate everything and you being here today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.